All right, what's up, guys? Going on? Back here with Michele and Walid. Talking again, a little coaches talk here. First of all, Michele, we'll go to you. We talked a little bit before we started here, but what's new with you, and what are you into these days?
Oh, I just finished. Right now, I'm doing a lot of testing. I have a hand dynamometer, and so let me back up. So we started. One of my specialties is baseball. Probably baseball and running. Those are the two things that I have the most training with. Um, which is so funny because I played football in college, and
Right.
so like football is could not be baseball couldn't be any further away from me as a position player,
Hmm.
playing football. And then the second thing, the only thing that there probably is nothing that football players hate more than running.
Right.
So so it's just really funny that those were the two things. But it's kind of like, it's probably like one of those things where it's like you're interested in the thing you're not good at, you know
Hmm.
and like you guys know, because you guys are both tied into football and played and whatnot, it's like all the big guys want to be skinny when they're done playing.
Right.
And then all the skinny guys, they all want to be like really big. So I was on the bigger end. So I've always been fascinated by, by the skilled players, or by friends and other people that I know that ran cross country, track, and the middle distance.
Yeah.
It's like, man, just to be able to like run, it's so impressive, because I think about now, now that I worked with Texas Tech University track and field, which is really, really good. Like, just thinking to like run an 800, uh, and you're like pushing your 800, I think is probably the hardest race. The 400 is really hard too, because it is near a max effort
Oh yeah.
the entire time. But the 800, I think, is maybe almost even harder, because while the 400 is essentially max effort, a little bit less than max effort, you're essentially going all out.
Yeah.
You know, it was really funny. Like when I was in sixth grade, I started out doing just the field events, shot put and discus, being a chubby little kid. And then, of course, the stupid track coach was like, all the field athletes have to run something, you know.
Right.
He put me in the 200, and I was telling my dad my race strategy, and I was like, okay, I'm going to start out hard, so I, get a lead or something, and then I'll back off for the middle, and then that way I'll have something left over for the end, so I can finish hard. And my dad's like, what? You're supposed to run as hard as you can the whole time. And sixth grade me, I was like, "What are you talking? I have to run as hard as I can that whole time? That's insane. Who can do that?" I remember that vividly.
Yeah.
So,
That's
so
that's a
anyways,
that's a long time for when you train to be, you know, uh, uh split second output guy,
yeah.
like a thrower. I mean, that's
Oh,
the, whatever, if that's a 20 with some second race, that's an eternity.
yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, and plus back then, again, this was like sixth grade, so I was like,
Yeah.
just a chubby little kid. I didn't do any training at all. But anyways, so like the 800, the 600 indoor or 800 outdoor, those are so hard because you're pushing it like 80, 85% max that whole time, and you have to really, your speed endurance and your lactate threshold like has to be so tuned in. And that's really like the hardest training, because it's so uncomfortable pushing yourself to that level. So I've developed a lot more respect for runners, and baseball is a sport that I just kind of got into from a biomechanics standpoint. So because those are my specialties, we put together a baseball strength conditioning program. And so that ran from like Thanksgiving until like 2 weeks ago. And so in the past week, I've been doing all the post testing, not only the performance tests, so verts and broad jump, 20 yard, 60 yard, but some power measurements. And then I have a hand dynamometer. So as a physical therapist, we isolate muscles. We have you like hold your arm up, and then we test how strong it is, and we give it a grade. And that's what we use to kind of like guide weakness, our treatment of weaknesses, impairments, especially if there's pain involved. Well, that's really hard whenever you're trying to like get into the performance space and you want to be able to quantify things. So don't let me forget, guys, if you guys have clients that you want me to maybe come up and do some more quantitative measuring on, let me know and I'll be happy to do that.
Absolutely.
And so what this allows me to do is I actually get an output in newtons, so we actually see exactly how strong somebody is, So like, for example, we've got this one senior, he gained 5 inches on his vertical and his vertical is already 24. So it wasn't like, 12, 5 inches on his vertical, 20 inches on his broad jump. We did a over the head backwards medicine ball throw to
Right.
test overall power. He gained 80 inches on that.
Wow.
He gained like 5 or 6% on his 20. And then like the strength measurements, he gained like crazy numbers, 20%, 30%, 40%. So the cool part is that I'm able to do all this analytical testing so that we can provide not only for us as not only could I can give the parents and the coaches of these kids outputs and like, okay, this is what to look out for. This is what you want to include on your training going forward. But then also me as a coach, I can also see, okay, what did I do well? What did I, what things didn't get better? What can I plan for in the future? If this kid was to continue training for me. So that's all the good stuff. The hell of it is somebody's got to analyze all that damn data. So I got to put all that stuff together and then actually do the comparisons and whatnot. So that's what I've been pretty much in the middle of, and, keeping going with some other clients, and we're getting ready for the next phase going into the spring.
Yeah, no, that matches up well. I know Walid's probably thinking it. We had our McKinley baseball program back in the fall. Pretty similar, the vertical and the broad. Looking back, I don't have the data in front of me, but I'd say we had a ton of success in broad jump with those guys. Those guys all gained really good, really good numbers on broad jump. I think a lot of it, while their strength and power certainly, improved over that time, a lot of it was just mechanical. We saw these guys mechanically improve in those 10 weeks alone. And these were, anywhere from sophomores to seniors. I can't remember if we had any freshmen in that group, but these were sophomores to seniors that, still had a lot of movement quality aspects that they can improve. So just that alone, I think helped a lot. And then, just the nitty gritty of, the move and the iron, a lot improved there. And what was really good to watch, because baseball can be such a little bit of an irritant to me to see how many of these guys miss out on that aspect. I'm hoping that these guys really saw what just, moving weight could do for them, because you just get that mindset of like the weight room is meatheads and big linemen and guys that bash heads on the football field. But baseball is probably, of course you think football, but baseball is probably right there with football for the most important to get in the weight room and to develop that maximal strength. I would say there's nothing in baseball that's your most longest kind of stretching out into that, lactic energy system would be, maybe if you're running down a play in the outfield, or you get, you're in a long, you hit a triple, maybe, you're running the bases, or you're stuck in a pickle. But outside of that, it's all,
power.
That's just super, fast bursts of maximal intensity, whether you're pitching, swinging, hitting that long throw from center to home. That's all it is. And that all is, you don't get that from, so many of these programs put so much, emphasis on their 1.5 mile time and their, just kind of their sets of 12 and, things of that nature. And it becomes almost like an irritant to see so much of it in baseball, because I feel like it's almost just like babying baseball players, because it's not that stigma of bashing heads on the football field. So I love to hear you, put that kind of, spin on it with your guys. And, we kind of saw it firsthand in just 10 weeks with a group of guys that definitely needed it.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing too, fellas, is that like, I'm working with this one coach and he's talking about with his kids, about, you know, their baseball players and how he doesn't want them to lose their elasticity, you know, and yeah, that's true, you know, because there is so much like plyometrics into baseball, you know. But the thing is that like, what's more elastic, a spaghetti noodle or a rubber band, right?
Exactly.
So if you can't create tension, then you have nothing to be elastic, you know, or yeah. So if your muscles don't have tension, can't create tension,
Hmm.
then there's nothing that can become elastic.
Right. That's exactly what I tell guys. Um, in our weight room, whether it's just in general when they first come in, and the parents might think that they're tight, um, or they're when they're executing a lift. I would say, imagine this like rubber band. If I were to snap you with it, the more tension I build up with, the more force it's going to hit you with. That's how you got to almost picture your body like building up tension to create bigger bursts of force. Um, but so much, while you might be able to do that as an advanced athlete, kind of going pop pop pop, through a movement, whether it's like some of our dynamic work is kind of that accelerated eccentric, like down into the squat, pop 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 pop. A lot of these guys aren't ready for that because they don't
Yeah.
understand that tension creating. So uh, yeah, what you said better than I could, but you nailed it on the head. Is where without that base of strength, there is no elasticity. It is just like you said, a spaghetti noodle. You drop the spaghetti noodle, it
Yeah.
just collapses, and then you can kind of see it happen. Where, like, say you're doing a depth jump or something with these athletes that haven't developed that yet. It's like the feet hit the ground. You can almost visually see it like a noodle hitting and kind of crunching up, and then trying to overcome that lost tension.
Yeah. And I the thing is, we got to remember like the demographic we're working with, right? So a lot of these baseball guys, softball players, you know, they're just more lax in general,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because of the demands of the sport. The kids that maybe develop more stiffness, you know, have more of the type 2 collagen, don't move quite as easily,
Mm-hmm.
readily. Those are the kids that may not gravitate towards baseball because, like, you know, in order to be able to put your arm in a certain position, like the number one injury risk indicator for baseball players is lack of external rotation,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So which is super ironic because everyone stretches the shit out of their medial rotators, and it's actually the exact opposite that they need is the external rotation, because that's the eccentric loading of the medial rotators. So you go and you cock your arm back, and in order to propel the ball forward, the deeper you can go into that, it's like, that's what I tell them, is like, this motion here, it's the equivalent of a squat, where this is at the top and this is at the bottom. A lot of the kids I work with, they have trouble holding tension here. You know, they almost relax here and allow the passive tension in their joint, their shoulder joint, to hold them in this position. So teaching them how to create tension is so important, especially because they're so lax. They just rely on the ballistic, you know, the passive stretch or the ballistic characteristics that the rotator cuff can exhibit, you know, plus another compensatory mechanism. So getting them not only football is so obvious, right, Walid, because with football, muscles are armor. So it's literally, it's protecting your skeleton by building up big, bulky muscles. Whereas baseball, it's not the same in that you don't have physical contact, but you do need to support the joints. You do need to create power from the lower body, and you need to support the upper body joints so that energy is transferred from the lower body into the ball or the bat.
My connection is mess up here.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I lost you guys though.
So jump in, Walid, when you hear us going on. But
I didn't hear like the last.
you didn't hear me. So you heard about me saying about how football is, you know, football players, you know, muscles are kind of like armor versus because of
That was the last thing. That was the last thing. Yeah, that was the last thing I heard.
last thing I heard. Well, all I said was that baseball is different in that you don't have the physical contact, but something has to protect the joints while you're going through such ballistic motions, And again, the arm for pitchers rotates. The actual arm rotates at about 1100 degrees per second. So that's almost 4 full rotations that occurs that would occur if your arm could spin. That's how fast it occurs in a second. And something has to protect the joint from literally coming apart.
Right. And yeah, and that's where the, we talk about the conjugate, method and the dynamic and the max effort, but also the repeated effort with to build that hypertrophy, at least from a football standpoint, in building that muscle to, as a protective, like as you said, armor. I like how you said that. So that piece of the conjugate method is implemented a lot for that reason.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, it kind of adds on to, another thing we see in kind of traditional baseball training is that, and maybe some of it ties into everything else involved with the athlete, but there's such a stigma around kind of babying that upper body in the training with the baseball players, where it's like they say they don't even want to touch it because of their volume of throwing, and maybe it is tough because from age 12 you're throwing 2-3 times a week anymore, however many pitches. But again, it's kind of like that weird thing where it's like you mentioned the force behind a throw and the 1100 degrees per second. So the kind of general concept out there is that's seen as, okay, we'll go out and do that, but do a few reps on bench press and it's like, we got to question everything about the safety of that. Now we've had, Walid, I'm sure knows, different positions that athletes can work with, but we'll essentially say pain-free benching, you can do it with throwers because you want to build that resilience, under those types of forces and loads so that when you were going out to throw however many pitches you need to, you've made that kind of adaptation under that stress.
Yeah, I always tell people the bench is a total body movement. So you can say, and it's the same thing with basketball players. I don't want you mess up their shot and all that. You're not. You're still working on your skill, so you're improving your performance both in the weight room and on the court or on the field. So as long as you're continuing to improve in both settings, that you're going to be okay.
Yeah. And that's why it's important. I think I think all of us do is to keep, I think we're all familiar with the phrase GPP or just general physical preparation, to keep your weight room work as general physical preparation. You get in that sports specific debate and all of that. We're not trying to tie anything that we do in the weight room so much into your game of play outside of joint angle or plane of motion. It's all to develop a base, and then you take that base out to the practice field or or performance. But I think that's kind of where, Walid, you say mess up the shot, mess up your throw. I think that's where the idea might come from. Whereas like if they can't replicate it in the weight room, they're doing something that's going to screw with their technique. Whereas we're implementing just the base of the pyramid. You get this, it's like building your engine essentially.
We had somebody, I had a friend of mine tell me that he was asked, what kind of training we do, specifically baseball, what kind of baseball specific things do we do? I'm like, well, we do a lot of things. We move everything maximally and we, try to develop power. There you go.
Yeah.
They're looking for the answer. Oh, well, we, do something specific with throwing or do something specific with swinging. It's not,
Yeah. And it's all stuff that they already get enough of, if not too much of, year round. But unfortunately, it's a tough selling point. But you just got to let the results kind of speak for themselves.
Well, and I also think that it also totally depends on the client. It largely if you're not in college yet, the GPP, the working on your foundation will improve your baseball skills. Now, once we start talking about high school kids, college kids, minor league kids, who their training age, you know how I go back to this all the time, training age, that is, once their training age gets to be, 10, like old enough to drive a car, so if they're in their mid 20s, early 20s, and they've been training for 15, 16 years, well, now you might want to incorporate some of these other sports specific movements, like more like overhead presses, landmine presses, heavy. You're doing eccentric control down, whether it be on bench or overhead movements or whatnot, or you're building complexes that way. Then you're just trying to get the stimulus to match the training age, but that's the reason why we can talk about these things, is because those individuals have built their foundation, and they have to continue to build, they need to continue to work on and maintain their foundation, or all the other stuff you tried to build on top of it won't work.
Yeah. And Michele, real quick, I don't know about your experience, but those athletes that you mentioned with the training age appropriate to start incorporating that stuff, I know I've found it is pretty few and far between.
Yeah.
Very few athletes would come in and say, you take a look at their baseline level of strength, power, and say you're where you truly need to be. Almost all athletes, especially in baseball, can gain general maximal strength, power, and general fitness.
Yeah. And so again, it's all like coaching the client in front of you. Right.
Yep.
And so again, it's like, everybody wants to know about the sports specific stuff, but if they don't have their foundational strength, then it's like, it doesn't matter how not sexy it is. That continues to be the need. Now, if somebody's been training elsewhere, for example, and they've been training for a long time, and then the coach is like, well, he's not getting better at baseball. And then you find out he's not strong despite having been training for a while, then it's like, what the hell have you been doing? Now, it might be as much the kid's fault he's not taking care of himself when he leaves the gym, or it might have been like a misappropriation of, training at the previous place, or, we all make mistakes too. So sometimes it's, we misread the necessity, kind of like we talked about last week with, making sure you identify what the client, how the client responds the best, and then trying to make that work within reason,
Right.
But the other thing too, to just go along with that, something that I forgot when we were getting Walid up to speed, was that because these kids that generally gravitate towards baseball are so lax, that they need to establish more tension. They need to establish more stiffness, and that will only come actively, because they don't have the passive stiffness because of the lack of type 2 collagen, that a lot of them, again, they're just loosey-goosey. That's why they like baseball, because they can really wind themselves up and then create all that tension. They can create all that explosiveness. But the thing is like we talked about with the rubber band, is that you need to reinforce or foster as much tension as possible and stiffness as possible in order to not only maintain that explosiveness, but also then as a protective mechanism as well, because, there's only so much stress that those passive structures can take. There's something else too I was going to say that we were talking about. I don't remember. Never mind.
Yeah. Kind of on your point there, it's such an interesting concept, because baseball is such a rotational sport that you almost think like, with the stiffness, and, the word stiffness might sound like a dirty word in baseball because it is so rotational, but it's an interesting concept to get through players' mind, that there's such a difference between controlled stiff rotation as opposed to just that kind of chaotic out of control. I mean, you can visually, so we've all seen it, and whether it's you can give a med ball to an athlete and say, let's do a rotational throw, and you can tell if they are able to kind of conduct that movement properly and with controlled rotation, not relying solely on the spine, but using their hips and just the kind of chaotic whipping around, flailing around like a fish. So even though these are both rotation and they're both required to play baseball, there is such a difference between the two, and finding a way to establish that with especially some of these young kids. We see a lot, Walid, in our gym that are 15 years old, 6'2", and 140 pounds. You know what I mean? I mean, that's just a recipe for that type of movement.
Yeah. So just to hit on what I remembered. So a lot of, cause you said that, I think Walid said that earlier, or one of you two, that, a parent will bring their kid in and they'll say things like, oh, my kid's too tight, or he says he's too tight. He says he's tight all the time.
Yeah.
The thing is that, because this pattern of laxity does exist, the thing is that these kids exist at their end ranges. So between locked out knees and end range, sway backs, and, they like to stabilize when they're doing standing exercises by locking out their knees. They do planks or push-ups, locking out their elbows all the way. They have no active tension, which, we use that. That's how we explain words that structures, contractile structures that you have control over. So muscles and tendons, so that you can actively create tension there or stiffness. Whereas passive structures, that's your ligaments, your joints, things like that. So these kids that lack passive tension, they rest on that passive tension. So what they feel that like they're stiff all the time, they're tight all the time, but it's not that they're too tight, it's that they're not tight enough.
Right.
So they sit at end ranges all the time, and that's what they feel. They feel that pull. And so if you tried to stretch that, it's going to stretch more, but then you're losing the elasticity and turning yourself back into that spaghetti noodle that we've been working our damnedest to get you out of.
Right. And it's essentially, said Walid again, Michele, tell me this gets into your field, a little more into your realm, but basically like everything you just said, it's essentially like almost neural compensation for the lack of stiffness that your body creates it artificially in a way, if that makes sense. So you're almost, your kind of neuromuscular system is almost like locking up to compensate for, I guess it would be the lack of active tension that you can create. Does that sound about right?
Yep. Okay. That's exactly right. Well, and so what happened is that your body seeks that tension.
Right.
That's why you cross your legs. That's why weighted blankets are powerful tools for some people. It's that. And now this is getting into Walid's specialty more, because you're a special ed teacher, right, Walid?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, you find these kids that crave that stimulus. So, and so what we see that same thing occur with athletes, but it's that we see them craving that stimulation via postures and these other kinds of things.
You hear us?
You there, Walid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it just us trying to identify who's who, and then again, you got to win that over. I mean, the thing that that sometimes I say is that, like Eric Cressy, who's one of the, probably the premier baseball performance guy in the country right now. His standard, a baseball player, like the absolute minimum that he looks to achieve for any of his athletes is like 450 pounds on a trap bar. That's where he thinks he needs to see everybody at. So until you achieve that, we're not, our goals don't change. Now we do need to keep it interesting, because they are doing this. This isn't, you do want motivation, and, buy-in is so important. But at the same time, us as practitioners and coaches, we need to remember what our goals are.
It is one of the hardest parts, like doing what works, which is so much more simple than a lot of athletes and parents really think. And like you said, maintaining the buy-in. Definitely some of the more success we've had recently with some of these groups. These kids have a lot of fun with it. They're hitting PRs. So definitely just groups in general. So a group of some of our more high school athletes, we want to be able to really give the tight coaching. So we keep it to, 4 or 5 guys. But that's helped a lot, just having kind of that knit community of those guys pushing each other. But it is one of the biggest battles, especially in private sector, is staying with what works, not trying to, overdo anything. When I say overdo anything, I mean, try too hard. But
Be too
keeping,
cute.
but keeping the interest. Wally, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy to get caught up, in being flashy. Do I need to do things for social media? Do I need to do things and keep the interest of the athlete, or do I just educate them on what we're doing is going to get you where you need to be?
Yeah. It's kind of one of the hidden gems. Not that specialty bars are the conjugate system, because those can be used in any program, and you can also do the conjugate without them. But it is kind of one of the hidden gems of having specialty bars and kind of rotating max effort variations, is that these kids can have all these different goals. You have a different PR all the time. You know what I mean? You're hitting very similar stimulus, but they constantly are trying to hit new PRs on, whether it's, a sumo or a trap bar or, a heavy box squat with the safety bar. They can always be chasing something a little different. And then our accessories will do, 3 to 4 week blocks focusing on the same thing, building up. And then, without changing anything, totally cycle something a little new. So we'd still chase goals. We're not throwing stuff at the wall. But it's kind of a good happy medium, I think we found.
Yeah, and in a year-round template and a macro, the kids, let's be honest, they want to.
I lost audio again.
Sports in a year-long setting or in a high school career, for example. So
I just think that, at the end of the day, there's going to be some kids who never buy in and parents who never buy in. And then there's a majority of kids that, either do buy in as long as you kind of give them, clear expectations to work towards, and then you have to sell them on it. You don't have to be unrealistic, but you do have to sell them on it. And I think that there's the other kids that are just all in. They get it. They understand it, so whatever that ratio is, maybe 20, and then 60 in the middle, so the majority of us that are going to even come to us, we're going to get that latter 80%, the kids who either can be sold or are in already. Like the kids who go home, instead of looking up dumb stuff on TikTok, they're like looking up fitness and exercise, Instagram and baseball and Eric Cressy and all these things.
Yeah.
Those kids, I mean, we get buy-in right away because they're gym rats.
Yeah. Because you wonder, okay, there's so much content out there, whether it's a college strength coach, high school strength coach. Cressy's with who, the Yankees now?
Yeah. Yeah. He still has his place, but yeah.
So, it's easily accessible to go look up baseball strength and see what they're doing. And why are you still questioning, what the local, you know what I mean?
Because it's not about that, Walid. That's the thing.
Right.
Is that none of these, because these kids or parents, and this is the problem with, some of these other facilities that sell snake oil, because the majority of the parents, it's like glorified babysitting.
Yeah.
Not that that's not necessarily even a bad thing, but it's something healthy and it's positive, and there's a, and even if they don't get scholarships to college, they're at least going to be a fitter, healthier person, especially with the lifestyle, diseases that we have that are so prevalent in our society. At the end of the day, almost all of us are just doing this to participate. Now, how long we participate, whether it's middle school, high school, college, very, very few of us get paid anything to do this beyond college.
3 minutes, guys.
Yep. So, it's something to think about, it's having our process and then selling it to our kids and the parents, and then, holding ourselves to that standard, and then, cause it'll show that it works.
Yeah. You'll always win at the end too, doing stuff kind of, the right way. It's cliche, but again, it's a longer process. We might not be able to bring in a absolute influx of guys by doing the fancy stuff or whatever, a lot of times what's LeBron doing on Instagram or that kind of stuff. But, in the end, you'll win because you're not going to, create any type of long-term kind of community or, kind of flow of, like we talk about the youth to the high school. And then if they're going to college, they go off to college and then they come back and see us when they're in town. You're not going to be able to create any of that just by chasing what's online. But that is, we are kind of winding down here. So, Michele, last thoughts?
Nope, that's it, man. Just check me out, Michele Iono, on social media. You can hear our podcast, Fuel, Move, Recover, drops every Friday.
Walid?
Yeah, as usual, the youth, we've got multiple signups. It's growing rapidly, and we've got our first female. We got 3 girls started tonight, so it's for males, females of a wide age range. So keep that rolling.
Awesome. All right, guys, good talk tonight. We'll reconvene 2 weeks from now.
Have a good week.
All right.
Great. See you guys.
See ya.